Hi, I'm Stan Biankwitz and welcome to Guitar Talk. I'm extremely excited to start a new series on Guitar Talk. We're going to be starting to talk about different styles of music. Today's guest is Ken Umack, and hopefully he'll be a guest for a few episodes of Guitar Talk to go through country blues guitar. But before we start the show, I'd like to present you with a small synopsis or a glossary of some of the terms that may be used. One, key. Key is the chord, the notes that are going to be used in the song. Keys are determined and are determined by voice, range, or ease of play on the instrument. Chord progressions. The most common chord progression is 1, 4, and 5. The letters in the musical alphabet go from A to G. So if we were in the key of E, E would be 1, 4 would be E, F, G, A would be 4, that would be the 4 chord, and B would be the 5 chord. The 5 chord is the turnaround chord, or the chord that brings you back to the 1 chord. So when they start talking about going to the 5, that means they're going to be figuring out a way to go back to the 1 chord. Root. Roots are the bottom bass note of the name of the chord. So if you're playing an A chord, the root would be A. Root motion is going from one root to another root, in other words, another chord, via other notes that are within the sequence of the two notes that we're going to. And I guess that's about it for the synopsis. There's not much to be said. Just hoping that you can follow this a little better by understanding this, so these things won't be going over your head. Some of these terms will be a little, maybe too much beginner for some of you folks, but bear with everyone, because we want everyone to learn how to do these things. This is the first of the series. Hopefully we'll have jazz, rock and roll, rap, the Megillah, as far as all the different styles of music that's available that incorporate guitars. Thank you for watching, and enjoy. Mr. Ken Umack.
Okay, hi, I'm Ken Umack, and I'm here with Walt and Mark, and we're going to talk about acoustic blues. Real simple acoustic blues, because that's about where we're at right now. So we're going to start out, I'm going to play a little, maybe a 12-bar blues with a monotonic bass, and maybe damp the bass after that and do it again. And then we'll see what I'm doing. Maybe we'll have some questions or something. Okay, a little blues with a monotonic bass. Bass keeps going. A little, start with 5 chord. And I'll put a turnaround in. Now I'm going to keep it simple with simple chords. Now I'm going to try to dampen the bass here, get a more of an authentic sound, but keep it going. you notice, I'm playing very simple chords, and the syncopation is all in the right hand. And you get that authentic sound. Something like that.
Yeah, very good.
So the essence in the beginning, when you want to learn to play acoustic blues, is to work on this monotonic bass. There's actually 3 types of basses they use. One is called monotonic, which means it just keeps going. It's there, boom, boom, all through whatever they're playing. You hear that bass. It never stops. The next type they use is an alternating. And that's usually used in what's called Piedmont blues, more like a Mississippi John Hurt or those guys from North Carolina or parts of Georgia. And they play an alternating bass. They don't use E for that much. They usually play that in C.
And G, a lot of G.
Or G, and alternate the bass. But the E players are usually either shuffling like this, or playing alternating bass, or they'll play what's called, I call, interrupted bass. So when you really get going, you might be playing monotonic. You can switch over here, you're still maybe monotonic, but the bass might drop out, or here maybe, let's see. I guess I'm doing mostly monotonic here, but part of my style. But there's the bass drops out. It dropped out there, back. So the first thing you have to do is understand the form, which is, there's several forms, 12 bar, what's called 12 bar, or 8 bar, or 16 bar. And they're all based on 1, 4, 5 progressions.
I think that one of the things that we were talking earlier, you were talking about the skeleton.
The skeleton,
That underlies everything here. And I think that's probably one of the most basic things they have to look at when you're going to start playing country blues.
Yes, it is. In terms of the skeleton I was talking about, underlying all these notes here, this is just an arpeggio. I just went right down the arpeggio: A, G natural, E, C sharp, A, G. They use those all the time, but it's overlying this other sound that we're hearing in there, which is that pentatonic minor.
Yeah.
It's underneath everything, and all the other notes are laid on top of it. But it's always there. Once in a while you'll hear Lightning Hopkins, he'll all of a sudden just drift right into pure pentatonic minor. It's part of his style. But most of the earlier guys like Blind Lemon, Blind Blake, Tommy Johnson, we played a lot of slide, or Robert Johnson. The pentatonic is under there, but they don't rely on it. It's there. And it's actually how you would learn to start to pick over this. We're going to play that G natural, we're going to bend it. Which brings us to another thing. You asked about the skeleton. Bending is like a real personal thing. If you listen to the different players, in order to imitate them, you have to listen to them and then bend the way they bend. They might not always bend up to the next note.
Yeah.
It might be a quarter step bend or just a little tweak.
Yeah.
Even on something like this, here's an E and here's an E here, they'll bend this E flat. They won't go all the way up to E either sometimes, just a little twitch on it and come back down. So there's no rules really as far as the bending goes. Well, a lot of rock players have, you got to do a complete whole step bend, or that should be a half step, or you've got to listen to how they do it, and then if you want to imitate their style.
I mean, a lot of it seems so simple to do, and like, you know, when they add in the hammer-ons and things like that, and it gives it it takes a pretty bland type of playing, and then it kind of elevates it to a different level. And like, I think what you're saying is when you have each blues player has a certain way of doing things, but I would imagine that they vary from that too. They'll go the you know, full step bend or the quarter step.
Oh yeah,
you know.
it changes as they're
Right.
playing.
Sure.
You know, so in other words,
Yeah,
there are no rules
I'll have
about
to
it.
say this, I'm not a blues guitarist.
Okay.
But like you were saying earlier about a lot of tricks, right? So basically what you get is you get a lot of these added notes, which become little tricks, but then you learn how to make rhythms out of it and something that flows and something that engages people. I mean, that's the trick. And what, you know, like what you were talking about, developing your monotonic bass. It's all about getting the feel and the flow and the sound to be exactly right, and then everything exists above it. So that's kind of what, you know, you're talking about. Like, you know, they get these little tricks, then they figure out how to make it sound like it's more complicated than it really is. Right. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's really not complicated.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, this module thing, I realized that, well, they're playing partial chords, they're playing simple chords over a set of changes that basically doesn't change. They didn't play 12 bars, by the way, the early guys, because they played by themselves. Yeah. So they had, you know, if you listen to them, they've got 6/4 measures in there, and 5/4, or 13-bar blues, 9-bar blues. But the phrasing is always perfect. It's just all connected. But if we're going to play together, you have to 12-bar. Probably came about in Chicago when they got up there and started playing in bands together in the 40s. So they had to have a standard form. But once you understand the form and its simple chords, the next thing, other than the monotonic bass, is how do they connect the chords? And here we are in E, and we're going to go to an A chord. 9 times out of 10, that standard little walk down right there. But if there's other ways to get to the A chord. Sometimes they'll do it like, but there's only so many. And after you have some of them down, and also in the reverse, going from A back to G, E rather, you have 6 or 7 for each change, and you've got sort of like a queue of these little stash of connecting runs that you can alternate as you're going through a different chorus and give it, and that's what they did. Essentially, as far as I can tell, and from everything I've read and seen, they improvised their way through all these things. You know, even when they did all the early recordings in the 20s.
Especially the
you know,
recordings.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and some of them did more than record one tune more than once, and it's never the same. You know, so
I think one of the hardest things, one of the basic things that actually make the sound is the bass note, and it being constant and steady, and you know, putting that rhythm out there to begin with, to overlay everything over it. You know, and you find people that, I mean, guitarists that use that flat pick, or you know, they try to switch over to a finger style, and they really have trouble doing it. But I don't use a pick when I play. I actually have a pick that fits over my finger, this finger here, so that I can actually strum with that finger, but I can still rely on using my fingers, you know?
Well, that brings up a good point. When you start studying this, if you start reading what many of the people that have become rather famous through teaching and whatnot, like Stefan Grossman, Woody Mann, Artie Traum, one of the things they say is there's no rules. And we're perfect examples of that, because you're playing with a thumb and index finger. And many of Lightnin' Hopkins played with just a thumb and an index finger. I think Gary Davis just used thumb and index.
No, and that's one of the things that really bother me, because it really limits me, and I've tried to add in other fingers, but I've been doing it for so long, and I was self-taught, so I mean,
Yeah.
it was
Well, if it
something
works.
that, yeah, well,
I mean,
every
they
time
did
I
it,
see
you know?
time I see somebody doing, I'll say, all right, I feel a little bit better, you know.
You know, guys will tell me, well, you know, you play with all three fingers. I play with all three and a thumb. And they said, that's not authentic, you know. Well,
You probably played more like this.
yeah, it's more like this.
Just tooth, yeah, that tends to be
you know. But because I studied classical years ago, you know, I never became a classical guitarist, but I did study, and this stuck with me, these three fingers. And so I don't do any of this with the index finger.
See, I do that now.
Oh, you do that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You were doing a lot of that before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I mean, and I actually do use this finger, but it's very limited on how much I use it, you know.
Right. Yeah, I converted completely over to fingerstyle about 8 years ago, and that was on electric. Because I play everything fingerstyle, and the big thing was getting how to play single notes. And once I learned how to do single notes like this, then I could take all my classical technique and apply it to that. So,
No, you were saying earlier that, I mean, you are basically an electric
oh yeah,
guitar
I'm a basic
player.
electric player, yeah.
And now you're doing classical stuff and things like that.
Well, I've been doing it all my life.
Oh, you have?
I started doing fingerpicking because when I started playing in the 60s, the only books out there, I was self-taught myself, the only books out there were Artie Trom's books, Stefan
Mel
Grossman's. No, I didn't get the Mel Bay stuff. That was later. It was Stefan Grossman and Artie Trom were the two.
Oh, yeah.
Two main ones, right? And then Stefan Grossman had Kicking Mule Records, and they had the records that actually had tablature with them, so you could actually play what was on the recording. I mean, this is, compared to what's out today, is so primitive.
Oh, yeah.
But it still was a way to play the music, you know? And so I would learn, you know, like, you know. You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that brings back memories, because I sat there with the Artie Traum book when I was like about 18. I hate to admit that, but
Yeah.
and trying to play Freight Train.
Yep.
And also, I was around the same age, around 18, and one summer, a friend of mine and myself decided we're going to learn acoustic blues. We fell in love with it. It was actually during the blues revival in the 60s. And we spent that summer from like maybe in the evenings, we worked, I think, in the day, but till the wee hours of the morning with Lighn'in Jefferson records and Lightnin' Hopkins records, and we just couldn't do it. I mean, it was just beyond. I could never figure out what Lightnin was doing. It sounded like two guys playing all the time, you know. And the only thing I actually remember from those days was he did we got this lick. He played CC Rider, and he played it like this. And that's the far as we got that summer. I think, you know, and if I remember right, I think he held the B7 for 2 bars.
Right.
And no going down to A. And then he did some kind of a fancy turnaround, but we never did figure that out. But that was the start of me all those years ago, trying to learn the acoustic blues. And that's about it. That's about as far as we got. I think my friend one night picked that part of it off. And we said, there it is. Okay, and then we started working on it.
You know, you mentioned Lightnin' Hopkins, and one of my favorite stories about Lightnin' Hopkins was some kid approached him and he wanted to record him, and his guitar had been pawned, and it was in a pawn shop, and he had to go to the pawn shop to get the guitar, and he gave Lightning Hopkins a bottle of whiskey and $10, and they sat in a hotel room, and he recorded an album right there in the hotel room. But he had to get his guitar out of the pawn shop to do it.
Well, supposedly that's what Mississippi John Hurt, those recordings they did at the end of his life, was they just got him drunk and got him to play.
I was telling you earlier,
Yeah.
my brother-in-law, he's passed, but he was a great blues guitarist. He started my son when he was probably 6 years old, playing Lightning Hopkins and Reverend Gary Davis stuff and things like that.
Yeah.
And my son is a phenomenal guitarist now.
See,
Who does nothing with it.
Ah, yes.
But that Davis stuff, it's just that's. I haven't gotten to all that ragtime kind of stuff, you know. And I have been fooling around with Blind Blake, which he's like king of the ragtime guitarist. But his stuff, obviously, when you listen to it, he has some instrumentals, and he's truly improvising his way through them. And you know, they're really incredible. You know.
You know what I found interesting is the little subtleties between the different parts of the country, between Texas, Mississippi, you know, Chicago, New Orleans. All these blues players have these styles that, you know, it's
regional.
really, yeah.
Yeah. I think the only way to and I have plans to do this actually in this coming year, but is to take each one. Like if you like Lonnie Johnson, I particularly really like Lonnie Johnson, his early stuff, and it's very melodic. It's all in drop D, mostly, and it's incredibly creative melodically, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So you take like a month and you just work on Lonnie Johnson, then a month on Blind Lemon, you know, because the styles are completely different. Lemon plays very stilted, like his timing is incredible. He's got, you know, these 6/4, 5/4 bars. He plays 11-bar blues and things, but he plays really, like, for a turnaround, he'll do stuff like. And he starts singing, but he's got this chopped thing underneath it. Basically does a lot of stop time stuff, you know, simple things. But that's completely different than Blind Blake, who's out there, you know, playing stuff like this. Totally different, so you have to spend time with each one. I think what happens to you is, and this is the beauty, you mentioned this about the playing, I wanted to continue that. Some guys play with a pick and fingers, and some guys play acoustic blues with a pick, and alternate it. But as far as I can tell, all the early blues guys were finger style. Sometimes they'd use a thumb pick. Right. You know, and Blind Blake may have used finger picks, but I don't think any of them used more than these two fingers and a thumb. You know, it just wasn't there.
I'm always amazed by the guys that play with a pick, and they.
Oh, I did that for about 10 years.
Did you?
It was interesting. I learned how to pick with my pinky and all that stuff.
I tried to.
But it was awkward. It was awkward. And basically, I think that's why it took me so long to get back to finger picking, because I hadn't used my index finger for 20 years to pick anything. I just held a pick. Because I did pick for a long time, just pick, because Berkeley got me to do just pick, and that's their game. And then I got out, and then I had a teacher who got me into playing pick and fingers. Like I said, I did that for a while, and I was playing mostly jazz at that time. So then it hit me. It was like I was in a duo, which I'm still in, and it's bass player and me. And I started realizing, wait a minute, bass player's doing more than me. He's playing melodies up here, he's putting bass down here, and I'm going playing a single note. And I said, why? Because I got to pick in my hands. So I said, all right, I got to try to incorporate that classical technique. So like what stuff you were talking about earlier about breaking stuff up, you know, so you go. Breaking it up like that.
Did you fire the bass player?
No, he's too amazing. No, actually what we did was, and actually I did some shows with Stan, we're doing all this looping technology now, just not to change the subject too much, and we're all crazy now. We're trying to be bigger than we are. Anyway, let's back to the blues.
Oh, okay.
Yes, let's go back to the blues.
So, well, anyway, you brought up
Yeah.
a good point. It's little pieces of things, you break it up.
Yep.
You know, once you learn, and I think earlier before we started, we were looking at this little hammer-on.
Yeah.
And that little hammer-on that they do, you know, it's a flat 3 to a natural 3 on the E chord. You can play it a lot of different places, and that's it. There's the flat 3 to the natural to the 5th. And it sounds like a whole different lick, you know. Well, it is, but that's the basis of it. And you get more mileage out of it over here. Mm-hmm. Same thing.
Oh, yeah.
There's one I'm going to play right now. Let's see, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 now. That right there, that little walk down, is another thing that you find they'll use all over the place. Like, couple it with this lick. There it is, you know, again. And this is, we're back in A, but we're with that flat 3 to 3 again.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So you get, and an arpeggio on top of that. A partial chord, maybe you go to a 3-note voicing here, 3-note voicing here. And these little pieces and licks, and I'm playing the blues, I guess. You know?
Well, I haven't had a chance to play anything, which is probably good for me because I feel like a piece of bologna between a piece of, you know, 2 slices of artisan bread. But I wish we could go on with this for a while because I'm fascinated listening to you, and your wife was right. You would get it.
Well, yeah. Well, I almost. It's tough. But it brings up a point. One of the things that I had was trying to emphasize to her at that time was she had said, you play sometimes pretty blues. And I'm saying, pretty blues. I don't want to play pretty blues, really. I want to play more of a authentic kind of style. And she said, well, you don't have the feel right, you know, with the open strings, and you know, it can make things pretty, like, you know. But she said, you got to get that, and without that feel, you really don't have the authenticity, you know. It's got to be there. You still can play things that sound very nice, but that real. Got to be based on that, and it's this shuffle that's really there. So once you get that to underlie everything,
Yeah.
you can stretch out a bit.
Well, I think we can go out on that. You ready?
Yeah.
Look. All right. Well, let's go to A now.